I never thought my life would turn out like this. My name's Rita, and this is my story. I was born to farmers, good people who taught me the value of hard work from the day I could walk. Our days started before dawn, tending to the animals and crops. Life was simple back then. I'd go to school, come home, and help around the farm. Weekends were for family time and catching up on chores. I didn't know any different, and I didn't want to. But things changed when I graduated high school. My parents, bless their hearts, wanted more for me than a life on the farm. "Rita, we've been talking," Dad said one evening as we sat around the dinner table. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." And just like that, my world expanded. I packed my bags and moved to the city, a place so different from everything I'd known that it might as well have been another planet. College was an experience. The classes were interesting enough, but it was the people that really opened my eyes. Kids from all walks of life, with dreams and ambitions I'd never even considered. And then there was Jack. I met him in my second year. He was charming, confident, and so different from the farm boys back home. Jack knew exactly what he wanted from life, or so I thought. "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," he'd say, lounging on the grass outside the library. "We should enjoy ourselves while we're young." I was smitten. Here was someone who saw life as an adventure, not just an endless series of chores. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. When I told my parents, they were cautious. They wanted to meet Jack, to get to know the man who'd stolen their daughter's heart. "He seems nice enough," Dad said after Jack's first visit to the farm. "But there's something, I don't know." "Just be careful, Rita." I brushed off his concerns. What did my old-fashioned father know about modern love? Jack was perfect, and we were going to have a perfect life together. My parents, bless them, paid for our wedding and even bought us an apartment in the city. "We want you to have a good start," Mom said, her eyes misty. "Thanks, Mom, Dad," I said, hugging them tight. "I promise I'll make you proud." As Jack and I stood at the altar, exchanging vows and rings, I thought my life was set. I had a husband who loved me, a good job in the city, and a bright future ahead. The first couple of years of our marriage were, well, I thought they were good. Jack and I both had jobs in the city, and we settled into a routine. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. "Rita, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Jack would whine every time I suggested a visit. "It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something." I'd sigh and try to reason with him. "They're my family, Jack. And they've done so much for us." "Fine," he'd grumble. "But I'm not shoveling any cow crap." I brushed it off as city boy squeamishness. After all, I'd grown up with those smells and chores. But now I wonder if I should have seen it as a red flag. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was over the moon, and my parents were ecstatic. "A grandchild," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Rita, we're so happy for you." Jack's reaction was less enthusiastic. "A kid? Already? I guess that's okay." I chalked it up to nerves. Surely he'd warm up to the idea of being a father. My parents, bless their hearts, continued to support us. They bought us a car, paid for vacations. I was grateful, but Jack seemed to take it all for granted. "Of course they're helping us," he'd say. "That's what parents do." When our son, Tommy, was born, I fell in love all over again. But Jack, well, he tried, I'll give him that. But fatherhood didn't come naturally to him. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd complain when Tommy cried at night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." I'd bite my tongue and remind myself that we were both adjusting to parenthood. Life went on. We visited the farm when we could, though Jack's reluctance grew with each trip. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd grouse. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I'd watch my dad and Jack working together, well-stained and sweaty. Dad would be patient, explaining each step, while Jack would grimace and fumble with the tools. Then, tragedy struck. Within a year, both my parents passed away. I was devastated. "They're gone, Jack," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't believe they're gone." He patted my back awkwardly. "It'll be okay. At least they left us the farm." His words jolted me. The farm. My family's legacy. And all Jack could think about was what we'd inherited? In the midst of my grief, Jack dropped a bombshell. "We should sell the farm," he said one night over dinner. "We could buy a big house in the city. Live like kings." I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy. But I was tired, worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood. And wasn't a wife supposed to support her husband's decisions? "Okay," I said quietly. "If you think it's best." And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold off to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Jack was like a kid in a candy store. "We're set for life, Rita," he crowed. "No more slaving away at work. We can do whatever we want." I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Jack wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely, I'll give Jack that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Jack, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. "That boss was a jerk," he'd say, or "they expected too much." "I'm not a slave, you know." I'd try to reason with him. "Jack, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about our future." He'd wave me off. "Relax, Rita. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, our son Tommy was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant, owned by none other than Jack's uncle, Robert. "Jack," I called out, "did you see this article about your Uncle Robert?" Jack's face darkened. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Jack's version of it. How his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. How Robert had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Jack into the family business. He never listened to what I wanted, Jack had told me years ago. It was always about what he thought was best. So I left. Started my own life. Looking at Jack now, lounging in his robe at 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace?" I suggested gently. "It's been years, Jack. People change." Jack's reaction was explosive. "Make peace? With that control freak? No way in hell, Rita. Drop it." I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Jack was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Jack on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. "I am not interested in his life, and it does not concern me," he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. "Who was that, honey?" Jack's face was a mask of indifference. "Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him." I stared at him, shocked. "Jack, that's a terrible thing to say." "He raised you." "Yeah, and made my life hell," he snapped. "I'm not going to see him." End of story. As I watched Jack settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Jack, I went to our bedroom and called Tommy. "Hey, sweetie," I said when he picked up. "How would you feel about meeting your great uncle?" Tommy was surprised, but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices. And there, in a bed surrounded by monitors, lay Jack's uncle Robert. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Jack had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. "Rita, Tommy," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long." Over the next hour, Robert told us his side of the story. How he'd taken Jack in after his parents died, raised him as his own. "I loved that boy," Robert said, his voice cracking. "I wanted him to have everything. To carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Jack, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility," Robert continued. "Said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Robert's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. "Jack demanded I sell the business," Robert said, shaking his head. "Wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. Said I owed him a carefree life." I glanced at Tommy, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. "I told him that's not how life works," Robert went on. "That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business. But he just got angry. Said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life." As I sat there in Uncle Robert's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place, I saw our life together in a new, harsh light. Jack had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. "Life is for pleasure, Rita," he'd always say. "Why kill ourselves working?" I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Jack hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he'd promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Robert's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice weak. "I won't be able to leave anything to you or Tommy. I wanted to, but..." "It's okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "We don't need anything." "I had plans," Robert continued, growing agitated. "A new project. It would have changed everything. But I ran out of time." Suddenly, Robert's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. "You need to leave," a nurse said, rushing in. "Now." A few days later, the call came. Uncle Robert had passed away. When I told Jack, his reaction made my blood run cold. "Finally," he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Took the old bastard long enough." I stared at him, disgusted. "Jack, he was your uncle. He raised you." He waved dismissively. Yeah. So, when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that?" In the end, Jack didn't attend. Tommy and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small, dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Robert proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home, gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. "The factory's got to be worth at least 10 million, I heard him saying on the phone when I got home. Can you believe it? I'm rich." I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then, things got worse. "You know, Rita," Jack said one evening, his eyes cold. "You're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better. Over the next few weeks, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. Mind your own business, he'd sneer. You should be grateful I come home at all. As I lay awake one night, listening to Jack stumble in at 3 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better. But more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything, about Jack, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Jack stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. Where were you? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Jack sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. None of your damn business, Rita. You should be grateful I come back at all. I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is? He ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right? The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. What, Jack, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty. His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. Empty? You've got to be kidding me. He paced the room, muttering to himself. Then he turned back to me, his eyes cold. Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here. Done with you. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Tommy walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Jack's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. Tommy, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me. He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Tommy. It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Robert's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway. Tommy glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Jack's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. I want a divorce, he announced, his voice cold and flat. I never loved you, Rita. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore. The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally. I'm moving to Uncle Robert's house, Jack continued, already pulling out a suitcase. Don't try to contact me. It's over. And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage, packed away in a suitcase, and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. Mom? Tommy's voice was soft, concerned. Mom, are you okay? I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Tommy wrapped his arms around me. It's okay, Mom, he murmured, holding me tight. We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay. As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become. Kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. And I realized something. You're the best thing he ever did, I whispered to Tommy. The only good thing to come out of this marriage. Tommy squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Jack's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy. Especially when Jack seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Robert's mansion, now Jack's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them. Blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Jack had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. "Meet my fiancé, Candy. Upgrade complete." The call started almost immediately. Friends, acquaintances, even Tommy's old school teachers. All of them asking questions I didn't want to, answer. "Rita, dear, is everything okay? We saw Jack's posts, what's going on? Are you and Jack really?" I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Jack's betrayal, it was too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Jack and asked to meet, after consulting with a lawyer. The day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Jack swaggered in, Candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Jack whispered in her ear. Well, Jack sneered, pulling out a chair for Candy. "If it isn't the old ball and chain. Candy, honey, meet Rita, the starter wife." Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. "I have the divorce papers here," I said, sliding them across the table. "I'm not asking for much. Just the house. You can keep everything else." To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. "Fine. Have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now." He scrawled his signature across the documents. He turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Now I can finally be with someone I truly love. Someone worthy of me." I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Jack's mocking laughter behind me. But I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. "Local business tycoon's empire crumbles, nephew left with massive debt." It turned out that Uncle Robert had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Tommy and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Jack's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything. And still, he was left owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top? His young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Jack wasn't the wealthy catch she'd thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Jack. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Rita," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Jack poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. "I was wrong, Rita," he said, his eyes pleading. "So wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me. The only one I've ever really loved." Then, to my utter disbelief, Jack got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box. "Rita, please. Give me another chance. Marry me again. Together, we can overcome anything." For a moment, I was speechless. Then, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. Jack's face fell. "What's so funny?" When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. "Oh, Jack. Did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough?" His expression darkened. "Now listen here," he snarled, jumping to his feet. This is my house too. I have rights. I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his own signature. No, Jack. You don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine. Now get out, or I'll call the cops. For a moment, I thought he might try to argue further. But something in my expression must have told him I meant business. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called Tommy and told him everything. My wonderful son was supportive as always. You did the right thing, Mom, he said. I'm proud of you. Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the weeks that followed, I made some big decisions. The house, with all its memories both good and bad, felt too big for just me. So I sold it, using the money to buy a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood I'd always loved. At 60, I'm finding that life is just beginning. I've started traveling, seeing all the places Jack always promised we'd visit, but never did. I've taken up painting, joined a book club, even tried my hand at salsa dancing. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Jack around town. He looks older now, worn down by his mistakes and misfortunes. Life didn't turn out the way I expected. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm truly, completely, happily me.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.